A wave of intense awakening is sweeping over us now, and this is causing bombs from the past to explode. And as I have repeatedly emphasized over the past few weeks, the truth is now pushing its way to the light. For many, it is now the time when things come to light with a force, shaking our previous view of life, shaking our trust, and bringing us back deeply into grounding. So we have had an incredibly long period where we sometimes had psychedelic perceptions, and our field of perception has really expanded so drastically. And now we are being brought back down to earth. This process makes so many things that were previously so important and taken for granted simply fade away and sink into insignificance. Yes, the process, whether it is happening in your personal life now or the issues of the past few years that we have all been dealing with as a collective, yes, it can really feel like bombs are going off. Yes, all that we have experienced together, all the lies that were tied to it, everything that is untrue, yes, none of it can remain hidden anymore. So this will certainly be clearly noticeable in the external life circumstances and will also lead to upheavals. I also assume that Mother Earth is shaking, yes. But what I always love to talk about here are the topics of what this does to us personally. Yes, what is going on inside us, and how can we best handle these processes, understand what it's all about? And yes, that's my favorite. For me, it's not so much about the external world, it's always a reflection of the inner world, and so things are clearly connected. Okay, first of all, for those who don't know me. My name is Linda Gysi. I have been a spiritual mentor for over 20 years. I am the author of the book Consciousness Next Level and the founder of the Being Potential Method. If you are interested in design potentials, we regularly host free live shows. It's all about you and your challenges. How can we optimally solve them with the science potentials? If you're interested, just grab your biggest problem and join us. I've put the links to our direct conversation with us or to the live show in the show notes for you. Okay, let's get started. So what I think is really important to understand in this whole context is that deep within your being, yes, inside you, a really intense vibration, a very intense frequency is awakening. So everything that is coming into your life now, everything that will happen, the origin is that something inside you is vibrating and awakening. This is similar to a Kundalini process that is starting for many people now, okay? And this vibration is now shaking everything up, and as a result, an incredible amount is being freed up, and suddenly and unexpectedly, you stand there and ask yourself, this can't be true. This isn't all true, is it? Such a feeling is triggered now because hidden time bombs from the past, from 2001, which were simply not visible before, are now going off one by one, and the truth is irreversibly coming to light, into the public eye. So there's nothing left to hide. Gradually, bop, bop, bop. Many are looking forward to it, but you will probably soon see that you should also personally buckle up quite well. For this, you should know that everything you have ever experienced, everything your ancestors, that is your forebears, have ever experienced, and all that the people you are deeply connected with have experienced is stored within you in an energetic layer or a subtle space. In your being, there is a space or a layer, however you prefer to visualize it. And there all experiences are stored from you, your ancestors, and also the people you love, with whom you are deeply connected. Imagine it perhaps like a scaffold or a matrix built from the struts of the past, on which you as your human self and your children and generally your descendants now stand, on this scaffold, yes, or on this matrix. And if there are missing supporting structures in this framework or matrix, or if a lie or unconsciousness clouds the view, a sort of renovation team consisting of truth and clarity comes in, thoroughly cleans up, renovates, repairs, stabilizes, and supplements where something is missing. Actually, it's definitely a good thing, yes. And that means you first have to look at these holes in your matrix, recognize the gaps in the framework, and that's a harsh reality check. The realization you will gain from this is so groundbreaking that it will be impossible for you to continue as before. I can promise you that. It is an awakening you never expected in any way. The ugly faces of the past are now pounding at your door, confronting you with the results of earlier decisions. The grimace standing ominously right at your door confronts you with a truth and a reality that you most likely did not see coming unexpectedly and unforeseen. You need to switch from an unconscious perception to a conscious one immediately in order to respond effectively and as soon as possible. And that with all the consequences and the whole chain of insights and connections that come with it. Yes, and it is so important that we understand, generally speaking, and this might sound a bit harsh, but it's not about the event itself that almost pops up from the past, but rather about the process that is happening within you and those connected to it, this process that is taking place within you. Yes. It's not about falling into drama or succumbing to fear and terror. It's about making sure that the processes triggered by this impact are really well processed in a manner that is thorough and well executed. And all of this, this process I just talked about, all of that's starting now, most likely indeed relates to the family or ancestral level for most of us, in fact. Indeed. And I would like to share a specific and detailed example from a client with you to help you understand better. I also have the okay for this, and I'll say right away, just a trigger warning. Yes, I deliberately and carefully chose this specific example because it so very well describes what can potentially happen now, in terms of the incredible depth we are talking about. Yes, and of course, I sincerely hope that the process for you is triggered by something far less intense. Yes, it doesn't all have to be so intense. But I'm not doing this podcast here to entertain you. Yes, I just want to make that very clear. As a rule, my main concern is always to provide you with added value. And when the energies, as they are now, just come around the corner like that, I just want you to know that. Yes, exactly. So let's get back to the example. So really completely unexpected, she had not anticipated it at all. Her daughter revealed herself to her. She confided in her that she had been subjected to sexual abuse for many years, and the perpetrator was the client's former partner, who had caused her immense suffering and trauma. Actually, the girl didn't want to tell that at all. She never wanted to reveal this secret, and she said so afterward. But she said she felt somehow controlled, like she was being guided. It felt as if an invisible energy or an invisible force was guiding her, and as if she had no other choice but to finally overcome her shame and tell everything. Yes, so much for this wave of energy that is now active. Yes, it is hard to escape from it. The shock about that, indeed, and of course the shock of what is truly all connected to it, undoubtedly. How insidious the ex-partner was, the psychological game he set up and deceived everyone. That was the beginning of the awakening for the client. From her unconsciousness, she really wasn't aware of it. She also says that there were absolutely no signs to be recognized or seen. And yes, indeed, it was really truly due to this psychological construct that this man had meticulously and carefully built. And yes, then of course the next wave of awakening is, yes, these feelings of guilt from the client about the fact that she herself, yes, this monster, this really cold-hearted dog, as she called him, this calculating, cold-hearted dog that she brought into the house, yes, and didn't notice anything for years. That really shakes all her trust structures in her. Yes, it's just, she says, it's so crazy, even though she has a keen eye on it, because she herself was, or had, because she herself was a victim of sexual abuse as a child and felt helplessly exposed to it for years. And the whole thing leaves her in such a state of disbelief and makes her doubt her own judgment so much. It just completely throws her off track. Understandable, the topic itself is understandable, but I'm not trying to highlight a topic here. I want to delve deeper into these processes. I want you to listen with your other ear as well. Yes, how must it be? How must it be for Mother Earth? What exactly triggers this phenomenon, and what kind of ripple effect is precisely behind it? So what are all these processes that need to be addressed? Because this doubt that is now surfacing in her is spreading into all the subtle layers of her life. And she says it feels like she has to learn to walk and live all over again while processing everything. Indeed. And at the same time, it has lifted a veil from her eyes, and she now seems to be able to look much deeper into the psyche of complete strangers. And the grief over the fact that her child has been helpless and alone all these years tears her heart apart incredibly, and, on the other hand, makes her highly sensitive. The intensity of the feelings, she says, is almost unbearable, but it also binds her absolutely uncompromisingly to a force of truth, as she calls it, that seems to exist within her. She described it very, very beautifully, and it is a highly energetic process. Sure, let's go ahead and move forward with this plan. I think it's a fantastic idea, and it could be really beneficial for everyone involved. So let's make sure we cover all the necessary steps. She clearly says that she seems to be interconnected to a higher power of her being now, and at the same time very deeply grounded through the pain, indeed profoundly. That's why I chose this example, because it is exactly about that. On one hand, we are highly connected to truth and clarity, and on the other hand, we are deeply pulled down to earth, or sometimes even into the earth itself. She just described it beautifully for herself. And of course, there are a whole lot more things involved. To make a long story short, there are many more entanglements and insights now in this whole situation, which primarily concerns her, of course, but also the daughter. And it also involves a father and the person who caused the whole thing. And that also indeed includes the former family members of the one who were in fact responsible for causing all this situation. There's also an ex-wife and children, and their complex relationship dynamics, where the Pandora's box is opening now, because it suddenly becomes clear where the daughters from the first marriage get their severe psychological problems from, which have been hidden for years and are now coming to light. Yes, and I called it Pandora's box. And I would quite like to actually call it indeed the Pandora's box of awakening. The box of awakening. And this is really spreading like wildfire through the structures of several involved families and family members, turning everything upside down. Yes, and this is just one example of many. And yes, this vividness, in fact, simply describes the energies as they are actually directed at us. And the one who has a lot of dirt on their hands right now, they rightfully get scared. Yes, and those who have somehow always felt like, wow, something isn't right, but I can't quite grasp it, will probably now see one thing or another come into clarity, come to light. Yes, what I also find very interesting in this context is that we, and especially I, always strongly emphasize in the course of awakening how little, or that they should give up resistance, yes, that we should give up the inner resistance to what is. Exactly in this wave of energy, and I find this really exciting. For the first time, emphasis is being placed on highlighting the positive side of resistance. Because the initial resistance to what is now exploding makes you clean up uncompromisingly, both internally and externally, and it allows you to recognize deeply hidden connections. It keeps you focused, and thus begins a maturation process that enables the formation of entirely new structures or a completely new sustainable foundation. Yes, that's what I meant earlier, that when we go through such a process, we are indeed no longer the same as before, and that's simply because a completely different form of foundation is created through these processes, which is much more sustainable. And yes, that's just how it is on our planet, this game. Yes, that it can often be triggered by such upheavals for many. And what is there to say about it? Actually, quite a lot, indeed. Spiritually speaking, a new crystalline structure is now forming within us under massive pressure, bringing the themes of trust, self-empowerment, and responsibility, including self-responsibility, into a whole new understanding. This mobilizes a chain of clarity that we need to cope with the upcoming new reality. So this truth, this clarity, the topic of trust, self-empowerment, and responsibility, these are simply incredible forces that are being put on entirely new foundations, because in the new reality, in the new time, new earth, fifth dimension, whatever term resonates with you, we need to be differently positioned. We can't go into this with unconsciousness, which is why it's always very, very important to awaken, to do consciousness work, to clear things up within yourself, because it makes it so clear, right? Unconsciousness is really, it's so harmful, because only through unconsciousness is anyone even capable of doing something so terrible. Only through unconsciousness is it possible that we don't see and perceive such things. Only through unconsciousness is it possible that we ourselves also make mistakes out of impulse, out of unconsciousness. Yes, indeed, unconsciousness, or rather the lack of awareness, is actually in fact simply the cause of most suffering on our planet. Yes, and that's why it's so important that we switch to consciousness and truly awaken, and not get scared of these processes, but rather tackle them. Yes. And I really like to say this again and again, if you notice that there's something to it and you're just not making progress, then it's no shame to get help. You don't have to go through this alone. But the fact is, clean up. It's simple. This clarity is simply priceless. Let's take a look at the example of the client, this young girl who really has to muster all her courage. It simply had to develop a coping strategy for itself over the years to somehow get through it, and then live with this big secret. And then she had to muster all her courage, overcome herself, and say it. Yes, and of course those are our children. They are simply incredibly brave, strong, and powerful. And they are often much more conscious than we adults, meaning the previous generations. And I think we really have a duty to make an effort. I really mean this seriously. We truly have the duty to make an effort. We can't just leave this responsibility to our kids. Yes, that was just slipped in there. Many of us are now truly facing a major identity crisis. And it is becoming clear, without any embellishment, what still works or worked in the hidden, and the ugly and unloved are pushing into the light. All that is hidden and repressed now wants to be seen, that have been deeply and completely. And all that is wounded wants to be loved so that it can finally find healing. Ultimately, it is a process of healing. Many will be shaken as they feel how their previous unconscious ego identities stand between them and their being, and yes, or stood, yes, and many are ready to walk the path to their true being. And thus begins the detachment from the old identity. That's why it's also an identity crisis. This is really another very intense process. We have had several such waves from time to time, but this one is really hitting many people very, very hard. And that's why. It is the shedding of a previous identity that simply no longer fits. Yes, that simply isn't true anymore, and that needed to be said again. The familiar rules and perspectives are losing their validity, and nothing is running as usual anymore. And everything that wants to heal must come to light for that to happen. In this current phase, it takes more courage than ever to face the unusual twists of change without knowing what changes are coming our way or what changes this transformation will bring. Yes, pay special attention to your automated response patterns carefully. Again and again, your previous states and your previous identity try to bind you to the old states and the old identity with reaction patterns. And there you can clearly see what is so deeply rooted and yes, also fear-based, in a way that is very deeply rooted and yes, also fear-based, so that you can mindfully learn to recognize and resolve it. Yes, so it is not unusual that amidst all the upheaval, you will simultaneously perceive an absolute strength and know that something very significant is happening right now. Of course, you can do that too. Yes, they are old, thick, dusty curtains that are now falling to the ground with a thud. Yes, the old matrix is collapsing, and this always feels like disorientation, fear of the new, and it always brings to light insights where we have previously failed out of unconsciousness. Yes, and this is also spiritual awakening, the profound emotional journey to your true being. And even if it leads through the darkest shadows, if you are seeking clarity on this journey and finally want to activate the last power potentials within you that are not yet activated, and you are already looking for a mentor and a mentoring program, yes, where it really is about you. Yes, this is a truly exceptional mentoring program where you are truly at the center. If you're looking for something like that, yes, then feel free to join us. I've put the link to the free conversation in the video description for you. I think that's it for today, for now. I'm sure it's a lot to take in for many. I'm very curious about your comments. Maybe you could also write about which bombs are going off for you right now. If it's comfortable for you to post it publicly, then feel free to write it in if you are comfortable with it. I appreciate that you always support each other with your stories, even in the comments. And yes, feel free to follow me on Instagram as well. There you'll find short, positive motivation for you and your awakenings. With love, the very best for you, 2001, you can do it. Your sister in spirit, your Linda.